Evelyn took a deep breath as she closed the last moving box. She looked around the empty house, memories of a life interrupted echoing in every room. Exactly 5 years ago, she had returned alone from a honeymoon that was supposed to be the start of a new life. Now, at 30, she felt as if she had aged decades. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the marks on the wall where there had once been photos of the couple. Evelyn allowed herself a moment of nostalgia, recalling the day she and Thomas had chosen that land to build their home. Little did they know that fate would be so cruel. It had been his idea to travel to the coast. Thomas loved seafood and insisted on trying a famous local dish. "It'll be unforgettable," he promised with a radiant smile. And indeed it was, but for the worst reasons. Within minutes of the first bite, Thomas's face swelled, his breathing became laboured. The ambulance did not arrive in time. Evelyn shook her head, pushing away the painful memories. It was time to move on, no matter how difficult it was. With one last look at the house that represented so many unfulfilled dreams, she closed the door and got into the moving truck. The new apartment was downtown, an old but charming building. Evelyn had chosen a flat on the 5th floor, hoping that the view of the trees from the nearby park would bring some peace. Little did she know that tranquility would be the last thing she would find there. In the first few nights, the silence seemed almost deafening after living in a house for so long. But soon that silence was broken by noises coming from the floor above. Heavy footsteps echoed through the ceiling, as if someone was running a marathon in the middle of the night. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but as the days went by, her irritation grew. The nighttime noises were just the beginning. Soon came the sounds of appliances at inopportune times. Who uses a blender at 3 in the morning? And to make matters worse, there was the mystery of the waters that occasionally dripped down the balcony, as if someone was washing the floor at odd hours. Sleep, already scarce since the tragedy, had become even rarer. Evelyn spent sleepless nights tossing and turning in bed, caught between the painful memories of Thomas and the growing irritation with the noisy neighbour. When she did manage to sleep, it was only to be awakened by vivid nightmares that made her relive her husband's last moments. Since Thomas's death, Evelyn's performance at work had plummeted. Her boss, who was a close friend of the deceased, kept her at the agency out of loyalty and empathy, despite her significant drop in productivity. However, her situation was becoming unsustainable. The deep shadows under her eyes and her constant bad mood began to push colleagues away, who, although they tried to be understanding, could no longer hide their exasperation. Evelyn, who was once admired for her creativity and efficiency, now barely managed to perform the simplest tasks, sinking deeper into a cycle of apathy and guilt. On a particularly difficult morning, after yet another sleepless night, Evelyn decided it was time to confront the problematic neighbour. She climbed the stairs determined, mentally rehearsing the firm but polite speech she would deliver. She knocked repeatedly on the door of apartment 601 until the door opened, revealing a man with a hurried expression. "Oh, hi! You're from 501, right? Sorry, I can't talk now. I have an emergency to handle," he said, almost tripping over his words as he grabbed his keys and left quickly, leaving Evelyn stunned on the doorstep. She stood still for a few seconds, absorbing the scene until irritation took over. He hadn't even listened to what she had to say. With hands trembling from anger, Evelyn grabbed a piece of paper and, without much thought, wrote an acidic note, securing it firmly to the door. "Your schedules and noises are not an emergency for me, but they are destroying my nights of sleep. Consider the possibility of living alone in a noisy warehouse." With a frustrated sigh, she went down the stairs, still boiling inside, determined not to let the issue go unnoticed. The weeks dragged on, and her irritation only worsened. Evelyn felt like she was trapped in a downward spiral of bad luck and exhaustion. Her boss called her in for a serious conversation, warning her about her productivity. She promised to improve, knowing deep down that it would be difficult to keep that promise. And then, on a grey Friday, the inevitable happened. Evelyn was called to the principal's office and, in a brief and emotionless conversation, was informed of her dismissal. She left the building in a state of shock, her legs wobbly, feeling completely lost. She walked along the busy sidewalk without really paying attention to her surroundings, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. It was then that she heard a shout, and before she could react, she felt a strong impact. The world spun, and suddenly she was on the ground, covered in something sticky and sweet. Dazed, Evelyn tried to get up, but a sharp pain in her arm prevented her. People crowded around her, worried voices blending into a confusing cacophony. Through the mass of unfamiliar faces, she saw a young delivery man, still mounted on his bicycle with a look of panic. "Oh my God, I'm sorry, are you okay? I didn't see the sign, the cake," the young man stammered, clearly in shock. Evelyn looked at herself and realized she was covered in frosting and pieces of cake. At any other time, the scene might have been comical, but at that moment she could only feel pain and humiliation. Someone in the crowd mentioned calling an ambulance, and before Evelyn could protest, she found herself being placed on a stretcher, still sticky from cake. The journey to the hospital was a blur of lights and sirens, her mind floating between physical pain and the absurdity of the situation. In the emergency room, Evelyn was taken to a treatment cubicle, still trying to process the day's events. A kind nurse helped her clean off some of the frosting and promised that a doctor would see her soon. Minutes later, the curtains opened, and Evelyn looked up, only to feel her jaw drop in surprise. There, wearing a white coat and with a stethoscope around his neck, was the face she had been imagining yelling at for weeks. The doctor smiled, apparently not recognizing her right away. "Good evening, I'm Dr. Arthur. Let's take a look at that arm, shall we?" he said, approaching. Evelyn blinked several times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she could form words. "You!" she finally exclaimed, pointing with her good arm. "You're the idiot from 601. Arthur's smile froze, comprehension slowly dawning on his face. "Oh, you're the neighbour from 501, the one with the note on the door." For a moment the two just stared at each other, the tension in the air palpable. Then, as if some cosmic switch had been flipped, both began to laugh. It was a hysterical laughter, born from the absurdity of the situation and the relief of finally putting a face to the enemy. "I can't believe this," Evelyn managed to say between laughs. "Of all the doctors in this hospital." Arthur, still smiling but resuming his professional demeanour, approached to examine the arm. "Well, considering you've spent the last few weeks wishing for my demise, I guess it's only fair that I take care of you now." Evelyn blushed, remembering the unfriendly thoughts she had about her neighbour. "I apologise for that. It's just the noises." "No, I apologise," Arthur interrupted, gently handling her arm. "My schedules are crazy, and sometimes I forget that not everyone lives at the same pace. I promise to try to be quieter." As Arthur continued the examination, Evelyn watched him with new eyes. It wasn't just the lab coat that made him seem different from the noisy neighbour she had imagined. There was a gentleness in his gestures, a genuine concern in his gaze that took her by surprise. "Well, the good news is that it doesn't seem to be a serious fracture," Arthur explained after a few minutes. "We'll do an X-ray to confirm, but it will probably just be an immobilization." Evelyn nodded, suddenly aware that she was still partially covered in cake. "I guess this wasn't quite the meeting I had planned with my troublesome neighbour. I don't look very threatening covered in frosting," she joked, trying to ease her own embarrassment. Arthur laughed, a pleasant sound that stirred something in Evelyn's chest. "Well, at least now you know that if you need to complain about the noise, you can come straight to the hospital. You'll probably find me here." The following hours passed between exams and procedures. As Arthur had predicted, there was no fracture, just a serious sprain that required immobilization. When the treatment finally ended, it was already past midnight. "My shift is over," Arthur said, helping Evelyn to stand up. "I can give you a ride home if you like. After all, we're heading to the same place." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, years of distrust battling against the unexpected kindness. In the end, fatigue won, and she accepted the offer with a shy smile. The car ride was quiet but not uncomfortable. Evelyn found herself watching Arthur from the corner of her eye, noticing details like the way he furrowed his brow in concentration while driving, the slight smile at the corners of his mouth. Upon arriving at the building, Arthur insisted on helping her up the stairs and into the apartment. Evelyn felt a twinge of embarrassment at seeing the mess, unpacked boxes, clothes strewn around. But Arthur didn't seem to notice, busy ensuring she was comfortable. "If you need anything, just call me. After all, you know where I live," he said jokingly before leaving, eliciting a genuine laugh from Evelyn. In the days that followed, Evelyn was surprised by the change in her routine. The noises from upstairs hadn't completely ceased, but now they were accompanied by amusing text messages. "Sorry about the blender at 4 in the morning. 36-hour shift. Need vitamins." Steps in the early morning, trying to break a record on the treadmill. "Sorry." Gradually, the messages became more frequent and less related to the noises. Arthur asked how her arm was and if she needed help with anything. Evelyn found herself smiling at her phone, eager for the interactions. One night, about 2 weeks after the accident, Evelyn was surprised by a knock on the door. Arthur was there, holding a pizza box and wearing a hopeful look. "I thought maybe you'd like some company for dinner, and I promised not to drop anything on the floor afterwards," he joked. That night marked the beginning of a new phase. Shared dinners became frequent, sometimes at 5:01, sometimes at 6:01. Evelyn discovered that Arthur was a great listener, and for the first time in years she felt comfortable talking about Thomas, about the pain of loss, about her fears. Arthur, in turn, shared stories of crazy shifts, of lives saved and lost, of the challenges of his profession. Evelyn found herself fascinated not only by the man, but by the passion with which he spoke about his work. Months passed, and almost without noticing, Evelyn realized that the nightmares had lessened. The sleepless nights were replaced by late-night conversations with Arthur, sometimes in person, sometimes over messages when he was on duty. It was on one of those nights, almost 6 months after the bicycle accident, that something changed. They were at Arthur's apartment, Evelyn helping him organize some things after a particularly long shift. "You know," Arthur began, his voice soft, "when I moved here, I thought it would just be a place to sleep between shifts. I never imagined I would find, well, you." Evelyn felt her heart race. She knew what was coming, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. "Arthur, He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Evelyn, I know we had a complicated start, but these last few months, you've brought joy to my life, and I would very much like the chance to do the same for you." The words got stuck in Evelyn's throat, conflicting emotions battling inside her. But when she looked into Arthur's eyes, she saw there all the affection, all the understanding she didn't even know she needed. That night, for the first time in 5 years, Evelyn slept without fear of the dreams to come. And when sleep enveloped her, it was not nightmares that visited her. In her dream, Evelyn found herself on a sunny beach. Her late husband Thomas was there, smiling that smile she had loved so much. But there was no pain in seeing him, only a sweet nostalgia. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked, knowing the answer. Thomas nodded, his eyes shining with love and understanding. "You deserve to be happy, Evelyn. You always have." With one last hug, Evelyn said goodbye. When she turned around, she saw Arthur in the distance, waving at her. With a light heart, she walked towards him, ready for a new chapter. Evelyn woke up the next morning feeling renewed. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating Arthur's sleeping face beside her. She smiled, realizing that sometimes love comes in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes an annoyance with the upstairs neighbor can become a beautiful love story. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.